Hey Internet, Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man here, and 6 years ago, I did a series on my personal YouTube channel teaching users how to play Final Fantasy the Trading Card Game, or FFTCG, and the response to that series was fantastic. I thank you so much. It's been very, very cool at tournaments having people come up and say they learned how to play from those videos, and they still get comments to this day that I answer on there as well. So I'm very, very appreciative, and thank you so much for stopping by and giving those a quick like or your thoughts. But it has literally been 6 years now, and Final Fantasy TCG has undergone some dramatic changes since we had 6 sets back then to the 25 and counting that we currently have now. And a lot has been added to the game, whether that's warp counters, the limit break deck, multi-element cards, and so much more. So it's time to circle back around here on Ready Check Radio and redo those videos with some of the additional information. I want to make them a little more concise. I went over some starter deck stuff in there. At the time, it was still relatively new. I don't think that's really appropriate here. If you're watching this video, you probably have product. So we'll kind of skip those portions and get right into teaching you how to play FFTCG in 2025. And I'm sure 6 years from now, we'll have to circle back and do it all again. While you're here, if you could give it a like, a subscribe, thumbs up, turn on those notifications here on Ready Check Radio. You can check out ReadyCheckRadio.com for our Twitch streams. We do Final Fantasy TCG locals every Monday night live. We encourage new players to drop in and ask questions there as well. And some podcasts, including one that's Square Enix Final Fantasy related. So we do cover not just the games, but this exact card game. In this first video, I'm going to take you through some of the basics, where you can get product, what you maybe should buy as a newer player right now, some of the things coming on the horizon. We'll do some card anatomy, taking you through all the details of a Final Fantasy trading card itself, and we'll talk about deck composition. Now, it is important to note here that while I am talking about composition of deck, I am speaking to the standard format, which is the most widely played format, and it is the one used in the Final Fantasy TCG competitive season, which we are in the midst of right now. While there are other formats like Limited, which utilize a certain number of sets, or Title, where you have to build a deck around a specific Final Fantasy game and the cards in that game, Standard does not have any of those special rules, and I will include a link below to the official Final Fantasy TCG website if you want to check out those rules for those alternate or off formats. We'll be talking about Standard. In Standard, no cards are off limits. There is no set rotation or anything like that. The only thing you have to abide by is the banned or restricted list, which again, I will link below so that you know what cards you cannot put in a Standard deck anymore after you know how to build a damn deck. Let's get started. All right, gang, here we go. Final Fantasy TCG, or FFTCG, standard format is a deck comprised of 50 cards in your primary deck and 8 in your limit break deck. Now, we will get into the specifics of the limit break mechanic and some of the other specialized mechanics and keywords in later videos here. Today, we're just going to be talking about how to construct that deck. And as a brand new player, there's multiple ways you can do it. You can pick up different starter sets. Sometimes they're 2-player starter sets with 2 decks so that you and a friend can get started playing right away. Sometimes they will just be a single starter deck. There should be many of these available. Obviously, hit up your local stores first. Give those local brick and mortar stores that struggle a little bit on the margins the business if you can. But of course, you can find them online as well. If you're looking for other product, you can hit up any booster boxes. Some of them you see behind me there. They also have anniversary kits, which are great for reprints of some competitively used cards from previous sets so that you might not have to shell out the extra money to go get cards that might be a little harder to get because the sets aren't printed anymore. They've also done recently a legacy reprint of a lot of staples. So if you can find that on shelves, definitely pick it up. And upcoming, we actually have a set similar to this, except it will be based on the latest World's Champion and their decks. So you will have two very competitive decks right out of the box a little later this year. Any of these will get you started with a standard deck. A standard deck is comprised of 50 cards in the deck. When you open up any of your starter decks, you will likely have a few other things in there, like a printed rules sheet that will get you started. While this is not comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination and doesn't go into very fine minutia of high-level tournament play and operating with the stack and everything else, we will cover those in this video series. This is certainly enough to get you started. It is a two-sided sheet. Yours will look similar to the one that you see on screen, depending on the starter deck that you get. Some new little tidbits might be added in yours. There's also additionally a paper playmat in most of these sets, and I do suggest that your first few times you do use the playmat just to get an idea of where things go. Again, something we'll talk about in a future video, but it will definitely help you out the first few games that you play. And while there might seem like an awful lot of things going on here for Final Fantasy TCG, a lot of it is repetition. As we get into card anatomy, there might be a lot of details we go over. But once you understand how those are all applied on one card, you got it, right? Like, you don't have to study it for every card. They all follow the same typical format on what is where on each individual card. In your standard deck, you can only build a deck of 50 cards. No more, no less. Other formats may vary. Pay attention to the special rules for those formats, including sealed and draft, in the links below, where your deck count might differ. Your limit break deck, your side deck, it is not a sideboard. We'll get to the minutia in a bit. Must be 8 cards only. So you can only have 8 cards in there. While technically you can run fewer than 8, you're not going to want to. Like, you would be hamstringing yourself. So don't do it. Just run a limit break deck of 8, even if you don't intend on using all 8 of the cards that you put in it for some reason. You'll see why maybe you might want to do something like that a little bit later. In your deck, you can only have 3 copies of any given card. And I'm not referring to the card name. So taking a look at a card, in this case, Cloud, who's a forward, and we'll get to all the details on Cloud here in a moment, we can only have 3 copies of this specific Cloud in our deck. Now, when I say this specific, it's best to look at the ID number in the lower center of the card. That ID number can only be represented 3 times in your deck. Doesn't have to be, could be 1, 2, or 3, but you can't go any more than 3. You can certainly have other card name Clouds in your deck that have a different ID number. There's nothing stopping you from having 9, 12, 15 copies of cards that are named Cloud in your deck, but you can only have 3 copies of each individual ID number. No more. Less is fine. More, not so good. Now, taking a look at the individual cards themselves, let's go through the anatomy of a card. And once you get this down for forwards, you'll basically have the general idea for all 4 card types that are in FFTCG: forwards, backups, summons, and monsters, as of the recording of this video at least. In the upper left-hand corner of the card, we see a number with a colored crystal behind it. Similar to other mainstream TCGs, this is a pay and spend type game. I need to pay to put Cloud onto my field. What do I pay? Well, that cost in the upper left-hand corner indicates that for me. I am going to need to generate 5 of what the game calls crystal points, or CP, to play Cloud onto the field. Now, since Cloud is a fire card, as shown by the red crystal behind the 5 and the fire icon below the text in the bottom center of the card, one of those 5 crystal points needs to be fire. We'll get to how to generate and spend crystal points later. However, just know that payment needs to have 1 CP, at least 1 CP, of the color of the card you're playing. So in this case, I need to generate 5 crystal points, one of which has to be fire. They could all be fire, 4 of them could be fire, 2 of them could, as long as 1 is fire, I am good. If I don't have any way of generating a fire crystal point, but I could generate 10 CP, it doesn't matter. I can't play Cloud. I need to have the ability to get at least one of those CP to be fire. Next to the cost of the card, we see the card's name. Now, I am going to be a little specific here, and maybe this is a little more advanced, but it's better that you have this detail right now. Some cards have very similar names. Cloud, right? Some other cards might have names that are slightly different. You might have a card named Shiva. You might have a card named Shiva XVI, specifically Shiva from Final Fantasy XVI. Those are not the same card name. So when we get to some of the more advanced rules and we get started playing here, keep that in the back of your head. The card names can be slightly different, and that does indicate two different cards. Why does that matter? You can only have one card named Cloud on your field at a time. You may have multiple versions of Cloud in your deck, but if you play this 5 CP Cloud, you cannot play another card named Cloud until this one leaves the field, whether it dies in combat or somebody casts a summon to get rid of it, whatever the case may be, you are name locked. It is considered name unique for Cloud. And now you can kind of see why Shiva and Shiva XVI are two different cards. You could play both of those at the same time. Now, how do we know if a card is name unique or not? Well, in Cloud's name bar, there are no additional icons to the right of Cloud's name. If we look at other cards like Security Officer here, we do see that in the upper right-hand corner after his name, we have a multi-card icon. This indicates that we could play more than one security officer at a time. Now, it could be multiple copies of this exact one, or a fire security officer, and if there were an ice security officer, we could play them both. That multi-card icon is what lets you know whether it's safe to play more than one, or in the case of Cloud, without it, you can only play one. We also want to look at Cloud's name bar to see if there was another icon, but there isn't. So let's take a look at that. Here's a lovely Class 0 cadet for you. And in the upper right-hand corner of that name bar, we see EX, and that is for X-Burst. We'll get to the specifics of the mechanic of X-Burst when we get to gameplay, but basically, the point of Final Fantasy TCG is to deal 7 damage directly to your opponent or cause them to not have any cards left in their deck when it's time to draw. Those are your 2 win conditions. When you take damage in FFTCG, you take the top card of your deck, flip it face up, and put it in your damage zone. If it has this EX or X-Burst icon, you get to do its ability for free. So there's a little bit of RNG in taking damage, a little bit of luck, a little bit of comeback mechanic, and you may or may not be a fan of this, as many people have documented in many, many videos and on many, many forums for FFTCG. But like it or not, the mechanic is there. Going back to our Cloud example, you see that Cloud has no such X-Burst. So be aware, there are 2 additional icons that may appear on cards, one indicating X-Bursts and one indicating whether you can play more than one copy of the card or not. If we get below the art of the card and we start looking at some of the additional details for Cloud, we start to see some of the items that we might encounter during gameplay. So the first one is going to be that bar right across the middle there. There's always a box on the left that indicates whether the card is a forward, a backup, a summon, or a monster. So if you're ever curious, or if you ever can't remember, just take a look. Forwards are primarily what we're going to use to deal damage to our opponents. Backups are generally used for their abilities and to help us generate crystal points. Monsters and summons are also ways to potentially deal damage if the monster could be a forward, or a summon might be used to break something or stop your opponent from doing something. And we'll get to the particulars in a bit. But you can always tell the type by that box. To the right, we see the card's job, if it has any. And in this case, Cloud is a merc. Now, while generally this doesn't have much to do when it's on the field, it can come into play. You might play a backup that says when it enters the field, search for a job merc in your deck and add it to your hand. In which case, we could go into our deck, find Cloud, show it to our opponent so that they know it's a merc, put it in our hand, shuffle our deck, and put it back. So the job might have implications elsewhere. As far as just generally speaking, it's flavor text. But in these situations where you can search for, or maybe job mercs get an extra 1,000 power because of a different card you've played, the job can be important to the actual gameplay. Finally, to the right of Merc, and just a little bit above that red bar, you can see the category of the card. Now, generally speaking, this refers to what Final Fantasy game the card comes from. So Cloud is generally going to be VII, the Roman numerals for 7, and that's what he is in this case. However, cards aren't always one category. They can be multiple. For instance, somebody from Dissidia Final Fantasy might have the category DFF-5 or V, right? In that case, it is important to note that that card is a few different categories. DFF for Dissidia Final Fantasy, 5 for 5, and it's also a combined category of Dissidia Final Fantasy 5. Now, generally, that doesn't factor into gameplay, at least not yet. We don't really have searchers that search for those combined categories. But if Cloud here was DFF7, we could play a card that searched for a category DFF forward and go get Cloud. Or we could play a card that searched for a category 7 forward and go get Cloud from our deck. So either way, it plays. So it's important to note that if there's more than one category there, yes, a searcher for one or the other category would be able to get you that card. When we get below the actual job bar there, we start to see the ability text of the card. Now, this can have a wide range of abilities, and we will cover individual ability types later. These could be action abilities where there is some type of cost paid to do a certain effect. This could be automatic or auto abilities. For instance, a card, when it enters the field, like Cloud, do X, Y, or Z, or a number of other effects. Sometimes there are field effects where all lightning forwards get 1,000 power, and that just generally is a field effect taking place as long as the enabler is on the field. If a card has no text here, it just doesn't have any abilities. It's just a vanilla card. No big deal. We'll get to the individual abilities later, but this is where you would find that text. And I do want to note here for maybe some colorblind players, although the upper left-hand corner indicates the cost of the card, 5 CP, one of which has to be fire, if you have difficulty seeing the colors of those crystals behind the number, you can always look behind the ability text here and see the actual icon for the element itself. Each element has a different icon. In this case, you can kind of see the fire icon there. At the very bottom of the card, we see the ID number that I referenced earlier, and that's just what set it came out in and what card number it is in that set, and its rarity, in this case, L being a legend. But we do see a big 9,000 in the lower right-hand corner, and this generally applies to forwards, sometimes monsters. We'll get to the specifics. And this is both their health and their strength. In some other TCGs, you might see this represented as two numbers, 4-4, 5-5, 4-1, to use Magic the Gathering examples. In FFTCG, this number represents both. So when Cloud is in combat swinging at, let's say, a blocker that has been put in his way, he will deal 9,000 damage. He can take 9,000 damage before he breaks or goes to the break zone or dies, whatever you want to call it, and we'll get to specifics in a while. This 9,000 represents both of those numbers. So if Cloud's power is ever reduced, that does reduce not only the amount of damage Cloud can take, but also the amount of damage Cloud does. So again, make sure you remember this is technically, for you Magic the Gathering fans, think of it as Cloud is 9,000, 9,000. It's just the same number in both regards. Now that we've broken down the anatomy of Cloud here and the forward, well, that's a funny way to word that. Now that we've broken down the card anatomy for Cloud here as a forward, let's take a brief look at some of the other card types, starting with backups. Both forwards and backups will be an important part of your gameplay, and we'll talk about why in a future video, but the card anatomy itself generally stays the same. We have the cost, in this case 3 in the upper right-hand corner, one of which has to be a fire crystal point, the name, Security Officer, the icon showing that this is a multi-playable card, and we can have more than one Security Officer on the field at a time, and then our information bar in the middle shows that this is a backup. It's called Job Standard Unit, relevant for maybe searching or buffing that other cards may do. And its category is 7 as well. So a card that let us search for a Category 7 backup Security Officer would be a viable target. We have our ability text in the middle of the card, and we have our icon showing us that this is fire, and we have an ID number in the very bottom center. We don't have power for backups because backups aren't generally attacking. Now, other cards may give a backup certain amounts of power, but generally speaking, backups aren't involved in our combat. They don't have power, and they don't fight each other like forwards do. So we don't get a power icon for them. Moving over to summons, which Magic the Gathering players, this is an instant. These can be used on your turn or on your opponent's turn anytime you have priority. More on that in a future video. These generally are missing a few things that other cards like forwards and backups have. We still have a lot of similarities. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the cost. We do have the name. You don't have to worry so much with summons about name clash here. If you have Ifrit on the field, you can still cast a summon named Ifrit. It doesn't matter. There is no name unique or name exclusivity rule when it comes to summons. We see in the center bar that it is a summon. Notice that it doesn't have a job. Summons generally do not. But it does have a category, so something that searched for a specific category summon could go get it. In this case, if we had a category 9 summon searcher that we played, this Ifrit would be a viable target. We have the text box that indicates what the summon does, the elemental icon in the background, and the ID number at the bottom, just like our backup. And again, no power. Summons aren't generally used in combat like that. They're not the ones fighting. They could certainly influence combat, but they aren't the ones fighting. And finally, we get to monsters, and monsters are a bit unique and can differ from monster to monster. In this case, we do see, again, all of the same things we've pointed out already on Cloud and Ifrit and a Security Officer, a cost, a name. There is no multi-icon, so I can only play one Hell House. Hell House does not X-Burst. We don't have the X-Burst icon. We do see the center bar giving us the monster type with a job and a category, an ability text bar, an icon behind it, and an ID at the bottom center. However, this one, Hell House specifically, does have power there, but it's written in a bit of a different font. It's kind of hollowed out, and that's because Hell House isn't always a forward. If you read the ability text, Hell House has the ability to become a forward, also a forward. He doesn't stop being a monster. He just temporarily also becomes a forward if certain criteria is met or certain costs are paid. And in those cases, when Hell House becomes a forward, he would have the power of 7,000. That's why it's kind of not, it's just stenciled in there, because you might have it, you might not. Some other monsters may not have the ability to become forwards at all, in which case they would not have any power printed on the card in any way, shape, or form. So monsters are kind of the one that you have to pay attention on what you're doing and what you want your deck to ultimately do, and whether a monster works for you or not. It's very common to run a deck that doesn't include any monsters at all, for instance. Not saying you can't do it. And a lot of competitive decks right now don't run them at all. However, flip side, there are some very monster-centric competitive decks as well. So you can kind of take this one both ways. Now, we have spent a lot of time looking at the element of fire here, but that is only one of the 8 elements in a game of FFTCG. Cards can be either fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, water, light, or dark. And there are some special rules that apply for light and dark, which we'll get into when we talk about paying for things and putting things on the field. But generally speaking, your deck is going to be comprised of cards from these elements. Whether you decide to build a mono fire deck where everything in the deck is fire, maybe you build an ice lightning deck where everything is either ice or lightning and you're playing 2 elements, or you decide to jam together all 8 elements if you're crazy, or 4 out of these 8 elements. You can build a deck out of any elemental combination you want. Just remember, you need to be able to pay for the things you are going to play. If you want wind cards in your deck, you do need to have the ability to generate wind CP to pay for that card. Remember, you'll need at least one of the element that the card is to be able to play it. So it can be a little challenging when you start mixing in multiple colors, but there are some really efficient ways to do it if you're a creative deck builder. Now, I hope that's given you some nice insight just to get started on where to get some product, what your initial standard deck should be comprised of, and some rules and limitations on building that deck, and the card anatomy. In our next video, we're going to talk about how to actually pay for cards and play them to the field, what they might do while they're there, and some general turn order rules that you can see in the sheets I showed you at the beginning of the video. If you like this and you want me to continue the series, let me hear you in the comments. Thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and make sure you're checking out Ready Check Radio for our live locals. And until next time, gang, this is Magic Man saying stay safe, and we'll see you on the servers.